Hello, and welcome to another career advice video. Are you unsure how to search for jobs? Do you want fresh career advice from people who've been in your situation and gone through to the other side? Well, this is the channel for you. This episode focuses on mental health tips for job seekers. If you want more advice like this for PhDs and postgraduates, then hit the like button and subscribe.
Let's get started then. I'll let Holly field this first question from me. Holly, let's imagine that I'm facing the end of my PhD. I've applied for, let's say, 15, 20 jobs over the last couple months, and I've heard nothing back. It's like all my applications are just disappearing into thin air. No one ever gets back to me. Sometimes, maybe at best, I get a form letter. And I've come to you and I say, I can't do this. I give up. Have I? Everything just feels like a waste of the last 4 years of studying for my PhD. Where do you begin with this person?
Where do you begin, TJ? Indeed. I think there's a lot bound up in that, and it's a really good scenario. But I think a lot of it comes back to what you were saying. And so a person like this who has, if you are applying for jobs at the moment, you've been doing that for a couple of months, you haven't heard anything back, and that's making you feel like your PhD was a waste of time, job hunting is a waste of your energy. I would come back to exactly what TJ said and think about, try to explore with you, are you equating your sense of worth with the lack of response that you're getting back from the job market? That word waste has quite a lot bound up in it. So I'd want to know, what does waste mean to you? So it might mean different things for different people. I know when I was in this situation, and I probably applied for about 15 jobs and not heard much back. And the thought process I went through was, I've always been identified as such a high achiever throughout my academic life. Now I'm putting myself out there in the professional world and no one wants me, and I'm really afraid that I'm not going to amount to anything. That was what went on in my head. So what I wish someone had done with me is just say, well, hold on, where are those feelings coming from? So what does it mean to you to amount to something? And I think once you unpick, I think a lot of us, if we've been in academia a while, we can really start to associate and conflate our self-worth with our results, be those results of experiments, be them results of research, results of peer review, etc. So once we start hitting up the job market and we don't get results, that just tweaks that thing where we associate our worth with our results. And I think I would try to work with that person on separating those two things to try to then change and go back into things in a more positive mindset. I also think there's a lot I could help this person with about how they're approaching the job search, how they're writing their applications, because it may not even be a rejection of their skills and their profile. It may just be a rejection of how they've written it. So what I always used to say, I used to do stand-up comedy, of all things. If you're a stand-up comedian, you get up there, you tell jokes and people don't laugh. I used to say to people, it's not that they don't like you, they just don't like your material, and you can change your material. And that's exactly the same with, you can change your job application material. So just don't give up yet.
That's great. I'm gonna pick apart some of that in a moment, but I'll give Fawzi a chance here. Fawzi, I'm gonna send you the same question but modified. Let's say I'm just finishing my postdoc and I've applied for 50 jobs, 100 jobs in the last, let's say, 6 months. Maybe you had some flexibility in your postdoc and you still feel empty in the responses you've gotten. Where do you begin with this person?
So I'm that person who felt, you know, like I'd wasted my time and wasted my energy, and I associated the lack of success with my self-worth. So it's really interesting hearing, you know, Holly's take on that. And I think, you know, as a PhD researcher, even as a postdoc, you're used to, for the most part, doing quite well academically or progressing quite well. So failure or negative results are quite alien, and I think it takes practice to get used to that. And while you may be familiar with, say, research that's not going well, or a paper that's not peer-reviewed the way you wanted it, you don't have the constant experience of job rejection or those kinds of failures. So I think it does take time, but that's something I've learned now. I think, you know, I remember thinking, well, here on the surface, I'm a really smart person, I've got a lot of qualifications. So how come no one wants to hire me? And how come I seem to be useless? And I went down this really deep emotional rabbit hole, and I regret that now, but it took me a while to recognize that that's what I was doing. I was associating my self-worth with my job failures, and after a long time did I recognize it was the way I was approaching the job applications, and that was an important lesson that I'd learned. But that's something that's not always talked about, and I think that's, you know, one of the reasons we want to especially cover mental health in this session is because on the surface it might seem that a rejection means, you know, you're not the person they want, but actually it's this application doesn't align well with the needs of the business at this time. And I think I've definitely applied to the same organisation a second time in a much more suitable application and been successful.
So I just learned that Holly used to do stand-up, and I know, Fawzi, you used to.
I used to do a lot of theatre performance, yes.
What did you pull any experiences from having a joke fall flat? Or
I think what I definitely learned is it can be very nerve-wracking to just put yourself out on display, but the more you do it, actually you become quite resilient to it. And I think there are negative experiences, but when you can't really compare yourself to other people's success in job applications. But when you're on stage, you see lots of other people perform with you, so you are actually seeing them do well and on occasion not do as well. And so you're picking up skills from them. Unfortunately, you don't get that same experience or exposure with job applications. That's why it can be really helpful to compare your work, your applications with colleagues, but also compare your applications with yourself. So an exercise I did, and I continue to do, is look at how my CV has changed, the wording as well as the content, and how my cover letters have changed. And I think I've noticed I tend to focus less on how brilliant and smart I am, and more because that was what was important to me earlier on in my career. And now I recognise that it's all about giving the reader what they're trying to read.
thanks, Fawzi. Holly, I'm gonna bring that one back now. You mentioned at the outset that it's important to separate self-worth from a lack of response. How do we do that? How can we experiment in getting more comfortable at doing that? Because I can tell you that even though I work with other people, I struggle with the same. Do you have some hints, some exercises maybe that a person could work on?
Oh, good question. I think I do. Yeah. So I'm quite a big fan of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT. And I talk about this a little bit in the following. article on my blog that I've just put in the chat, which is about my experiences of imposter syndrome. And I think, I think in general, and a PGR said this to me actually the other day. He said, we're so much harsher on ourselves than we are on our friends. So one of the things I think can be useful now, this takes practice, but is almost to kind of create a mental version of your best friend. And when you are feeling down about your application process, say you put an application in for a job and you just get an automated response, before you go into your own mental spiral of that, think, what would my best friend say to me in this situation? And I'm pretty sure your best friend wouldn't say, this is your fault, this is because you're bad, this is because you're not good enough. Your best friend would say, right, I'll help you. Let's have a look at, you really want to work for this company. Let's read about them. Let's find out about them in more detail. And a friend will naturally be constructive. If they're a good friend, if they don't do that, then, if they're a toxic friend, then that's not a good situation. But that would be my first thing, is to try to train yourself to have a mental best friend, and think about what they would say to you in that situation and try to tap into that. And again, this also comes into, don't go through it on your own. Get other people's perspectives, use careers services, use mentors, use colleagues. And something that I've never successfully done yet, but I would love to do, and there's a couple of them on the call, I saw some of your names, is to get some of our postgrad researchers at Birmingham kind of set up their own little job application self-help groups. So nice. People who are at the end of the PhD and maybe working in similar fields, have your own little like peer-to-peer lunch groups where you say, right, what have you applied for this week, what's gone well, what hasn't, and you support each other. So I would say, yeah, so that was it. So mental best friend, CBT, because that's a CBT technique that reframes what's happening from your failure to something more constructive. And also, don't go through it on your own. Seek those objective voices, and try to create a little bit of a community for yourself while you're going through this as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Holly.
I think that CBT approach is something that I really enjoyed as well, and it worked not just in an academic context. So I can give you an example of one that really helped me later on in my commercial career. I had a position where I had to sell research services to technical directors of large companies. And I'd never really had a commercial role before. So I focused a lot on why I wouldn't be successful. And I was my own worst enemy, really. And a lot of the arguments I had were, why would they want to listen to me? Or am I bothering them? But the reality is, once I actually was able to speak to an independent coach, and they advised me to kind of really break it down. And after I broke it down, I recognized that I thought I was going to be interrupting these senior people. And I think I'd become accustomed to that after many years in academia. But the reality is, these technical directors who are in charge of large pots of money want to find the best commercial solution for their businesses so that they can reduce their costs. So when I started to think a bit like that, I recognized that the research solution I was trying to sell had a clear value, and all I really needed to do was to communicate that value as clearly as I could. And if someone didn't want it, then that's fine. That's not the end of the world. Sometimes we don't want something that a shopkeeper is trying to sell us, but sometimes we do. And my role is to find out whether they wanted those services or not. When I started to approach it in a different approach, not trying to defeat myself first, then actually I was a lot more successful. And then I began to think about if I had known that when I was applying for roles,
straight out of my postdoc, I recognised that not assuming the worst would actually have helped me a lot. But that's the point. You pick things up as you go, but the key is to learn from them, I'd say.
Can I just come in?
Go for it,
TJ, because something that Fawzi said just sparked a thought, and I think that analogy he gave between how he was coming at selling that commercial solution, and ultimately he was successful in selling the solution when he believed it had value, and you will be the same about yourself. If you don't believe that you have value, that may well come across in the recruitment process. That may well come across when you're applying for jobs. So this is sounds very easy for me to say if you are at the crunch point of really needing a job and really needing to support yourself. But what I would say is, I think a job hunt has a lot in common with relationships. So in a relationship, you can't give and you can't be of yourself and add value in a relationship if your cup is empty and if you don't believe that you have value. And this is why I think looking after yourself is paramount, because you need the reserves in your tanks. You need as full a cup as possible. You need to believe that you do have that value, that you have something to add, and you're not coming at this with low, you're coming at this with as many reserves of energy as you can. So don't stop doing the things you do for yourself in this job hunt. Do the hobbies, do the little things that fill up your cup. Because I remember what kind of broke things but also really changed things for me was one interview I had that I came out of, and I came out of with a really bad feeling, because it was a wake-up call that said to me, Holly, your frustration and your negativity really showed in that interview. And that was when I knew, right, I have got to change my energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me
doing stand-up was part of that anyway.
Let me pull all this together and come back to Fawzi and say, from your book, I know that you went through this trying time, actually a lot of it alone, when you were searching for a job. And Holly mentioned this mental version of your best friend, and then actually you picked up on getting feedback. My question for you is, how do you identify that safe space, especially when you're in a really vulnerable mental place? A lot of us are feeling down. And we're all, we might even struggle to ask our best friend for help. How do you identify for yourself a place that's safe to start that process?
Yes, I think I was afraid to ask friends for help. I think for different reasons. I think partly because I didn't want to bother them, I didn't want to be a burden, and I didn't think that they would. And I think that related to at that point in time, I didn't think of didn't have much confidence, but also because sometimes asking for help can seem like it's a cop-out, or you haven't achieved it yourself, which isn't a very good attitude to take at all, because no one can do anything without support. I think finding a safe space, actually one of the things that I've been reading about, I've been seeing a lot of hashtags on Twitter and social media about first generation PhDs, and that community probably doesn't have the same support network or abundance of experienced friends who know what university is like. So I think, speaking to my parents or my family about the challenges of academia, it wasn't something I was ever used to. I did often focus solely on my academic colleagues, but because they were only focused on academic roles, they couldn't share the support I needed for transitioning to industry roles, which are fundamentally very different. So it took me a while to find a place that could provide me with the objectivity. So I went about it in two different ways. I recognise that asking for simple, clear help, like please look at my CV and edit it, or provide specific assistance on the presentation I wanted to do, rather than help me get a job, which is a bit more open-ended. And then I also tried to compare my CV with someone else's, so I could do like almost like an objective data analysis. And I think that worked really well for me because it was fun and it used the skills that I know were good, finding differences and analysing data. And then as much as I didn't like to admit it, I did spot quite a lot of things that I was doing wrong. And as I slowly improved and used more commercial language, because I was interested in commercial roles, I got a bit more traction. And it's when I started getting traction, so slightly more positive responses, interviews, then I recognised actually there's something in this. So I continue to document my findings. So rather ironically, an academic approach, but that really helped me. So I think each person's safe space is unique to them, and
Sure.
That's something to consider.
Holly?
Yeah, can I just come in there? I thought, like, if we were going to open for questions soon and kind of wrap up what Fawzi and I have been saying, I just kind of wanted to come back to exactly the question, TJ, that you asked me at the start, because I suddenly remembered. So on Friday, I had an international PhD. He's got his Fiver coming up imminently, actually, and I helped him. I think it was just after Christmas with some job applications. And I just want to read out, and you wouldn't mind me doing this, because it's exactly what you talked about, TJ. And it's about coming back to this idea of if you always do what you've always done, you will always get what you've always got. And it's just thinking about what small thing can you change your job hunting that can give you something new. So he said to me, I'm sorry for not getting back to you for a long time. You might remember that back when I came to you, I'd applied for about 110 jobs, and I got 2 interviews that weren't successful. I stopped applying for jobs in the last few months of 2020, and then I came to you. And when I started reapplying, the response was amazing. From the 5 jobs I applied for in 2021, I got 3 positive feedbacks, 2 interviews, and I've recently been given a job offer.
Nice.
And he says, I think the key point of success was what you told me about matching my experiences and background with the role in my CV and cover letter, and discussing the relevant aspects. And he goes on to say about how he felt like, he was that person who said, I'm fed up with this, but it was just such a simple thing that worked with him to change his approach. Wow, that pre-Christmas and post-Christmas, almost like a different person.
Holly, you've talked about small things a couple times. What are some small signs we should watch out for before they become big things, especially when it pertains to mental health?
Oh, very good question. Number 1, trying to be aware and noticing if you're stopping doing those things that you usually do for yourself. So, for example, if you think, I'm not going to go to the gym today. I've got to write the rest of this CV, or got to write this cover letter. Look out for that if that starts to become a pattern, because they say that's emptying your bucket, as I call it. Also, I would say look out for if it's making you, this is difficult at the moment, especially I'm aware we're all from different countries. Our lockdown restrictions and our COVID situations will be very different. But if you are in a position where you are, there is some social mixing, etc. Look out for signs where you are withdrawing, where you're spending less time with other people, where you're feeling like you don't want to do that for some reason. Just look out for that, and look out for any changes in your eating and your sleeping. Really basic, but again, those are the things that fill your bucket. And it's looking after yourself. They sound like such simple things, but they're so important. And then I would also say, I know it's difficult, applying for jobs is a full-time job, but try to have something else. Try to have something else that's there at the same time. For example, so like for me, it's always been things like at the moment, it's like Zoom dance classes. Like I'm having some quite challenging family situations at the moment, but I still do my Zoom dance classes because I need something else to think about.
Sure.
And to have something else going on, so you don't just become your job hunt. Like it doesn't subsume the whole of yourself. I know it's very easy that it can do that, but
yeah.
Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. Actually, I think you don't, if someone doesn't like Zoom dance classes, there's a wealth of other activities that you can do. You can do online volunteering, you can do exercise in your home, you can socialize in ways, and I think that's something I found I stopped doing, and I was regressing. And then when I started picking that up, that really improved my mental health. And I think for anyone who thinks, well, actually there isn't that much opportunity, I think actually there is. And I'll give you some really good quick examples there. So if you're in a situation where you're unemployed, for example, you can add structure to your day. And volunteering is a really quick way to get some skills and experience on your CV, so it's not looking blank, and add routine and structure. And if you like socializing, you can do phone calls with people. If you want to be outside, there's a lot, litter picking there's a lot of local communities who do that, as well as exercise groups. So there are things, you can try to find them, and it doesn't have to be a lot, but even a small amount can add something to look forward to. And I know when I had no structure, no employment, that one Friday every 2 weeks was something I really looked forward to. And it was only an hour, but I really enjoyed the conversations I had and I learned from them. So I think that really does give you some confidence and pride when you do.
Sure. Let's think about taking ourselves towards a close. I'm going to send another question around. And you two have both been talking about an ability to look inside yourselves and find some things that have changed, find patterns in your own self that have changed. And that's actually a very advanced skill, I will definitely say. I want you to speak. I want you to change your perspective for a moment. Fawzi, you are noticing something strange in a friend of yours who's going through this situation. Maybe you can pull from an example in your real life. What did you notice, and how did you actually bring it up? And before you answer, I ask this because for those of you in the audience, one of the ways that I get outside my own head is to engage with other people who might be looking for this help, and in turn that helps me find where I am. So that's the origin of my question. Fawzi, have you got an answer?
I think now I'm a bit better at it than I used to be, but I try to provide an alternative perspective, and similar to the example I gave about trying to sell solutions, I look for what is what is the person trying to achieve, or why do they think they're feeling that way if they're not feeling particularly well, and leave the question open-ended so that they can articulate it, and then see if, rather than just agreeing with them, which can, you know, sometimes be what my friend is after, pose something that challenges them. And actually, I've done that more frequently, not just with yourself, but with a lot of friends, and I think that I grow from that as well.
I'm not sure about what I said in terms of what I would look for in that person, but I really take what Fawzi just said about what really helps is to get a different perspective. What helps you get a different perspective can be talking to people going through the same thing as you, because you can spot yourself in those people, or you can see people who are doing what you want to do well. So I'm thinking, I feel like it's a bit of a missed opportunity for the 30 of us to be together in this room and not make the most of that. So, you know, I was wondering whether some of you who are listening can use this as a start to build some bridges with people who are in your situation, and whether it might be an idea, if people feel comfortable with doing this, sharing your LinkedIn or your Twitter or something, to see whether you can have a look at each other's profiles and maybe form some job hunting buddy type relationships. But I think something that I found really useful is being with people who are in the same situation and seeing some of the things that I'm doing reflected in those people. And it's only then that I think, oh, actually, that's really negative, or oh, actually, that doesn't give a good impression. And I spot that and think, and then that makes me think about how I need to change how I'm presenting myself. And then obviously I can work with that person to say, like, what's making you feel like that? What making you think that, and be that friendly voice that we mentioned as well.
Cool. Thanks, Holly. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here, and we've run over time, but we should look at closing. What I want to give, unless our panelists have any final words, is my own summary, which is that this is a struggle, and that those of us who actually work with it every day as our jobs are still working with it. We've mentioned lots of small things that can often add up to become big things. We've mentioned that it takes a strong support network, and that all of us has shared a little bit about how we've searched for that support network and who we use, and how maybe you can, here your attendees can try to build that for yourself. And that getting inside our own heads in this job application process, it takes some skill to navigate it. And we still work on it, and we're here to help you work on it as well, if that's something you want to do. So we have run over time. We do want to thank you a lot for the support that you've shown us. We do really appreciate questions. It's been a little quiet today, but our aim here is to give you the support we wish we had in times of struggle. So reach out. Let us know that you found us from here, and that really helps us know where you're coming from. You can join us next time. We've got it scheduled already. We'll meet together on June 28th at 7 p.m. British Summer Time as we discuss some common application pitfalls. You can tweet at any of us. You can find Holly at Holby83. You can find Fawzi at Fawzi_AC. Or you can find me, TJ, at Soldrevet. That's SOLDREVET, since I guess many of you don't speak Norwegian. And we'll just be happy to take your questions there. As Fawzi mentioned, this is being recorded and it'll go up on the YouTube channel, PhDone. You'll also find a link to this video. in a follow-up email that will come from Fawzi, which will include contact details and a summary of our top tips. I'm seeing some lovely thanks coming through the chat, and I really want to acknowledge those. Thanks, Riham. Thanks, Ravi. Thanks, Ivan. Thank you all, and good night.